So sustainability is the ability of people to use resources today in a way that doesn't diminish the ability of future generations to use resources in the same way. That's what really the forest products industry is all about. We're all about renewability, being able to make sure that the resource is sustainable for future generations to be able to use. Logging can make for a better managed forest if it's done responsibly and in a sustainable manner. And here in the state of Oregon, we have some laws that forest owners and people harvesting the forest have to follow that help ensure that we're managing our forest in a sustainable manner.
There are a number of different laws that protect forests in the United States. The federal lands, which in Oregon represent about 60% of the forest, are under a series of acts. The biggest one is called the National Forest Management Act, and that basically says there will be forest plans whenever forests are managed. On private lands, in Oregon we have the Forest Practices Act, the Oregon Forest Practices Act, and it governs all private lands, requires reforestation, requires habitat protection, it requires stream protection. And then on state lands, they need to also follow the Forest Practices Act, but in addition, they have their state management plans that they're under. So really 3 different levels of protection for 3 different types of land. People have the concept that, you know, the federal forest is the big supplier of the logs, but it's mostly private land. And it's very important that we have the rules like the Forest Practices Act that keep it sustainable. And we harvest about 3 billion board feet off of private forests in Oregon, and that's about 3/4 of the harvest in the state. So it's pretty significant.
So most of our logs come from lands owned by either the state of Oregon or the state of Washington. They're all certified under PEFC, and some are certified under FSC for chain of custody control. Well, underneath PEFC or FSC, we have to ensure that the tree is severed correctly, that it's replanted, that we handle the product in a way that is secure, so that we can guarantee to the customer that the product is coming from environmentally soundly managed forests.
Well, the first way that harvest is limited is how much timber is grown. In Oregon, we grow about 10 billion board feet a year. We harvest about 4 billion, but any owner isn't going to harvest more than they grow on an annual basis. That's one of the definitions of sustainability. So we do clear cutting by removing all of the trees, most of the trees, and then starting a new forest over. It's done for a couple reasons. Number one, it imitates nature. Most of the stands, like we're in a Douglas fir forest here, Douglas fir is a type of tree that grows in even age stands. So they all come in together after a disturbance like a fire or a landslide or something. They grow up, and then, you know, they're all about the same age. So clear cutting imitates that. And so the stand that we're in was clear cut in the mid-70s, and we were in a plantation that dates from 1977. The other reason is economic. So besides the fact that the trees really grow best, economically, if you can come in and do logging where you're taking more volume per acre, it makes your logging cost less. So it's just economically better. And then third is disturbance to the site. If you're on a management system where you come back every 10 or 20 years, you have to have a road system and you have to come back a lot to be on the site. With clear cutting, you're in now, you're not in again for 25 or 50 or 75 years. And then there's intermediate harvest, like thinning. This stand that we're in has been thinned 3 times already since it was planted. But eventually, there will be a final harvest, which will be a clear cut.
It's actually a pretty interesting and complex process. The logs are severed, brought in by trucks, scaled for payment purposes, and then taken into the mill to be made into finished lumber products.
So in order to promote sustainability, the forest products industry has been really progressive at looking at moving into the composites side of the industry, where we can basically take the tree, break it down into smaller parts, and then use science and technology to put those parts back together so that we can engineer products that perform in a way that we need them to perform in their final application.
Several things happen. When you make a lumber product, you're actually sequestering carbon inside of that product, which is great for the environment. We also do different things. We have solar panels to create some of the energy that we use, and we have regenerative drives on some of our equipment that actually creates energy while we're processing the raw material.
So things that are currently going on in North America, There's a movement towards taller wooden buildings, and those taller wooden buildings are full of these composite products that I was talking about, such as cross-laminated timber, glue laminated beams, laminated veneer lumber, etc. Lumber is one of the only major building products that's out there that's really and truly renewable. We grow trees in the ground and we produce lumber from those, and when we harvest trees, we replant so that we have more trees that we can use in the future.
It takes from 1 to 3 years to grow the seedlings. So most people use seedlings that are 2 years old, so 2 years before you log, you would order the seedlings of the right species, the right seed zone, and the right elevation area. Then after logging, you may need to do some slash abatement, either by burning or piling or chipping or something to get it clean site so you can plant. You also may need to do some vegetation management. Often they'll do a site preparation spray to get rid of the weeds that would compete with the trees. Then they plant, and within a year or so, they'll come back and do a stalking survey, see if they need to do any fill-in. On private lands in Oregon, you're required, in Western Oregon here, to establish 200 trees per acre. You need to have the process started within a year after logging. You need to be completed with planting 2 years after logging. And within 6 years after logging, you need to have those trees in a free-to-grow state, which means that they're taller than the competing vegetation, be it grass or brush or hardwood trees. And then, once you reach that point at 6 years, it's free to grow and ready to go on till the next harvest. With natural seedlings, it's really important to have bare ground because the seed needs to have bare ground to germinate on. So you start out with this early stage, very young forest, where it's really not dominated by trees at all. Mostly what you see is brush and shrubs and grasses and stuff like that, with a few trees in there. Over time, the trees grow up and they start dominating the understory vegetation, and eventually you get to a thing called crown closure, where the crowns of the trees get close enough together that they shade out the understory. At that point, you're in what we would call a teenage forest or a mid-successional. They also call it the undergrowth exclusion stage. So we go from trees and brush to just trees, and then as the trees grow up, they start competing with each other. And some of the trees will die, and the other trees will keep getting bigger and bigger. And that's what you call the stem exclusion stage, or a middle-aged forest. Then as the trees get even bigger, each tree as it grows, it needs more and more space, so there can't be as many trees, and eventually the forest opens up into a mature forest. And this might take 40, 50, 60 years or longer. Eventually then, this mature forest becomes an old growth type forest, and this might take 200 years. And then it gets so open underneath that you get a lot of brush and a lot of other trees growing underneath. And it stays like that until a disturbance happens. And here in Western Oregon, probably average of every 150 to 300 years, there would have been a major forest fire that took it back to ground zero. And then you go early, middle, late, and old growth. It's kind of the 4 stages. Our forests are very valuable for recreational, for spiritual, for all kinds of things to people. And so it's important that as we manage our forests, we keep that in mind. It's not just a tree farm. It's a forest that we want, and we need to look at all aspects. So we need to be economically, socially, and biologically sustainable. And on public lands, they tend to manage more for the social and the biological, with the economic not being as important. But we can do most types of logging and still have recreation, still have protection of the biological diversity and of the species that are growing there.
Our employees are trained in safety and in correct manufacturing processes, but also in environmental controls. So we have our ISO 14001 environmental certification, as well as a chain of custody, and those underpinnings are very important to our employees in terms of what they do and how they do it, because the employees recreate in the woods and in the water, and so they understand the need for making sure that we have clean air and clean water. You can't do anything without people that have a similar vision to the organization they work for. So probably the thing I'm the most proud of is our employees embrace our values, and they understand the mission that the company has.
So the way I see the Western forest evolving over time is I think we're going to move towards periods of more active management, obviously in a sustainable way, but working towards growing trees that allow us to create the products that we need to live in a sustainable manner.